How many times have you promised to yourself that from this moment onwards, you're going to do it differently with food? And meant it with every cell in your body? 100, 1,000? Maybe it's something you say to yourself every day. So why is it so difficult to make the changes that you feel like you want more than anything in the world? Well, your brain is trying to figure that out. It's trying to figure out, why can't we do this thing that we want to do more than anything? And this is the thing about brains. When they don't know something, what they often do is they just fill in the gaps. So your brain will have come up with its narrative about why you haven't been able to heal your relationship with food. One of the most common narratives that brains come to is usually along the lines of, there's just something wrong with me. And that one is particularly corrosive because it's the story of shame. But your narrative might be, I'm just somebody who can't cope with their emotions. Or, and this was one of my particular ones, was, I'm not trying hard enough. Which is crazy when I look back on that, because I was trying so hard. But it's the only conclusion I could come to. Why can't I do this thing that seems to be so simple? I just want to eat like this instead of like this. I can't do it. I'm obviously not putting the work in. And I have said this a million times, that people try to change the way they eat by trying to change the way they eat. That's the method. It's this very behavior focus where we think, I'm the only one doing the thing, so therefore I should just be able to make a decision about what and how I'm going to eat and then follow through on that. But here's the thing about being so focused on just changing your behavior, and that is that behavior is the last link in the chain. By that I mean behavior is an outcome. It's an outcome of what you're believing, what you're feeling, and what your biology is doing. So whatever's going on in these three places leads to an outcome, which is whatever your behavior ends up being. So when you're just saying to yourself over and over again, right, I'm just going to make myself do this behavior, I'm just going to do it, you're only focusing on this last link. And if the other links aren't in place, it will continually feel like you are failing. Now, of course, the behavior focus is very compelling because it's usually a case of, if you just stick to this eating plan, or if you stick to this number of calories, or if you don't eat this type of food, then you're going to get the outcome you want. And it's really measurable as well. You can measure it in what your body's doing weight-wise. You can measure it in what you're actually eating. It can feel like something very solid to hold on to. Whereas when we're talking about the other things like beliefs and feelings and biology, there's so much more nuance and flexibility and how they all interact with each other. It can just feel complicated and overwhelming. About 6 months, I was having a time where I felt completely overwhelmed and stressed, the most overwhelmed and stressed that I've been for a long time. And in a moment where I felt like I didn't know what to do with myself, I felt like I could almost hardly breathe, my brain says to me, why don't you go and buy a load of food, binge, and then make yourself sick? Now that was a behavior that I did years ago, and I haven't even had a thought of it for a couple of years. But this thought comes to me, why don't we do this? This will make you feel better. So when we're looking at the links in the chain, my biology was out of whack. Like my parasympathetic nervous system was completely overwhelmed, and it wanted to bring me back down to regulation and a sense of safety. So in that state of stress and overwhelm, my brain's looking for a solution, and it goes, here, why don't you do this old behavior? Because that stimulates the vagus nerve, and that will activate the parasympathetic nervous system, and we will feel better. Now, I had had that thought 1,000,000 times, that's an exaggeration, hundreds of times before. And back in the day, when that was the kind of behavior I was doing, I was powerless, absolutely powerless against any thought like that. That thought came, and it never felt like a choice not to follow through. But now, when the thought came, I was surprised, but there was no part of me that thought or believed that I was at any risk of following through on that behavior. Why is that? The first link of the chain, my belief system, my personal narrative has changed. I think my response in my head was something like, well, we just don't do that anymore. Like, that's not what we do anymore. Now that came so easily because that narrative has been established over many years now. At the beginning, when I was recovering, it was much harder because you're trying on a new narrative. I often talk about the recovery process as a creative process. We can't just remove the behavior. This is what people often try and do. I want to remove the behavior, but my beliefs, feelings, and biology is still like kicking off, and I'm getting all these triggers and urges everywhere. And eventually that state of belief, feeling, and biology seems to just take over my free will. And now I'm back in a compulsive cycle. So to try to remove a behavior without shifting the belief, the emotion, and the biology often doesn't work. And maybe you know somebody who did seem to just go, I'm just going to start eating like this. Maybe they cut something out, or they adopted a certain style of eating and they were just able to do it. If this was the case for that person, their beliefs, their feelings, and their biology are all in alignment. So even if it's challenging for them or uncomfortable for them to make that change, there's a belief that they can do it, they feel like they can do it, and their biology isn't rebelling too strongly, so they're able to stick to it. Now, in order to be able to create a new narrative, that doesn't happen overnight. This isn't just a case of, let's just get some affirmations about exactly how I want to be. Although, some people find affirmations help them. Not really my thing, but they can be helpful if they feel true. And often if you're trying to create something new, which isn't in alignment with how you feel, an affirmation that doesn't feel true or have any emotional power behind it for you probably isn't going to work. So our belief systems tend to change gradually through little pivots. One thing that can really help to start changing your narrative is to be really curious. We need to increase our self-awareness if we want to be able to recover. And if you are acting in ways that you do not understand, then there are blind spots that need to be uncovered. And this can be challenging because things go into blind spots for a reason, because normally it's not the thing we actually want to acknowledge. So we need to prioritize curiosity over judgment. The minute you judge something in your psyche that's there, we want to reject it. We want to go like, no, that's not me, that's not there. I don't want that. So I'm just going to go and look over here where I like what I see over here better. So we keep splitting off from different parts of ourselves. Now there's an idea that goes along the lines of we cannot create and consume at the same time. So for some people who feel compulsive around food, they might feel compulsive around other things as well. They might not just be binging on food, they might be binging on social media, television, the news, podcasts, information, relationships. And if you are constantly consuming, there is no mental space for the creative process to take place, to give your brain space to be able to think in different ways. Because you're just listening to other people's thoughts, you're just consuming what other people are creating instead of creating yourself. And I don't necessarily mean creating an actual thing, I just mean creating thoughts, your own thoughts in your own brain. One of the biggest shifts I had in how I viewed myself and my narrative about myself happened in a moment of meditation. And it was this realization that came from the bottom up. I sometimes talk about bottom up realizations and top down. So top down is when something goes through the brain and it's analyzed and becomes a realization. So it comes from outside. But a bottom up realization is one that feels like it comes from your soul. And this is what it was like for me. It was a moment of realizing that, yes, I espouse gratitude and I practice gratitude. But I noticed that what I'd been doing, I realized what I'd been doing was feeling gratitude, but always about external stuff. So if something went well, there would be like this gratitude towards life. But if something didn't go well, or I felt like I messed up, I was beating myself up. And this moment, it came to me, I was like, hang on a second, like this doesn't add up. Why do I get all the criticism when things don't go well? And then why do I get none of the appreciation when things do go well? Like how does that work? And it was so funny to me in that moment. Like it was a moment of just a joyous realization. I was so amused that I could have missed this. And even the following morning in the shower, I was giggling to myself about it. And that realization, this was a few years ago now, hasn't left me. It was a massive shift in how I think about myself and how I talk to myself about myself. And one of the reasons why it was so powerful was, one, it came from me, and two, that emotional reaction that came along with it helps to make the shift. One of the reasons why like our old narratives become so entrenched is because there's so much emotion around it. There's overwhelm, anxiety, there's stress. And all that emotional charge keeps us quite stuck in old narratives. So another thing, when you're looking at like, what is it I'm trying to create? How is it I want to be thinking and talking to myself about my life, about my behavior, about who I am? This needs to feel true. And so if you're continually avoiding yourself by always listening to something, always watching something, always scrolling on social media or eating, or always taking things in, there isn't an opportunity to think in a new way, to have bottom-up realizations. And I share this stuff today just because for me, the more I focused on my behavior, the more of a complete failure I felt. And so when I shifted it around to spending a little bit more time with myself, having time when I'm not consuming, learning how to be in my own mind. And this is why we need the curiosity and the compassion. Because for some of you, like, you've got a very critical voice in there. So you're like, why wouldn't I be consuming? To shut that up. But this is going back to what I was saying about we split off parts of ourselves in our psyche, the parts that we don't like. And until we bring them in, whenever that part is activated, that part can take over our behavior and it feels like it's not even us anymore. So ultimately, the take-home message of this is make some space to have your own thoughts. And if you've been watching my videos for a while, you know I don't say this very often, but if my content is helping you, if you would consider hitting that subscribe button, giving it a like, it helps YouTube know that this video is helpful to some people, and then it helps other people find my content. I know I always feel so weird asking for that. It just feels like, it gives me a little bit of the ick. And whilst I'm already feeling the ick, I might as well plug my intuitive eating course that's starting in October. If you're watching this in the future, you can still click on the link because I'll probably be running it again. It would be great to connect with some of you there if you want to go into some of this stuff deeper. And that course is going to be a lot about making you think, not just bombarding you with information. Anyway, thank you for watching, and I will see you on the next video.